you better take it seriously and act to prevent it. And that's the central lesson that we learned in the rebirth of the Jewish state and the Jewish people in Israel. We don't wait to be annihilated. We take forceful action against our would-be annihilators. And I think that, people see it after you do it.
Is Israel committing war crimes and genocide? Take a look at this clip over here with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu talking on Patrick Bet-David's podcast. And they discuss all of these topics about the ICC prosecutor, about the genocide claim. So we'll watch this clip together and then talk about it. But first, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Check this out.
For a person that lived in Iran, I look at the critics and they're giving, hey, let me tell you, it's not fair what he's doing with this. And you see ICC, which the average person, when they see ICC, 124 countries, that if you step foot in their country, they're supposed to arrest you, okay? And they're calling you a wartime criminal, the offenses you've done, the amount of, again, like I said earlier, they're calling it a genocide. How do you answer to the critics that they don't follow politics, they don't follow the stories closely? But if they see you, if they see 120-something countries that if you land there, they're supposed to arrest you, the average person is going to say, maybe this isn't a good guy.
Yeah, well, they said that about Churchill, too. He was a warmonger when he was talking about the German Axis and the danger to the West. He said he warned of the slumber of democracies. And I guess if I learned one thing from our history, the history of the Jewish people, is that you can't sleep. When somebody says they're out to annihilate you, you better take it seriously and act to prevent it. And that's the central lesson that we learned in the rebirth of the Jewish state and the Jewish people in Israel. We don't wait to be annihilated. We take forceful action against our would-be annihilators. And I think that, people see it after you do it. After you do it. After you realize your vision, then people say, well, yeah, we begin to understand it. But they don't before. And that's certainly true of the case here. In the United Nations, you have 180 countries, 190 countries. And a great majority would tell you that the earth is flat. It doesn't make it flat. And the vilifications against Israel is a country committing genocide and other war crimes. That doesn't make it true either. Let me tell you, did you ask me about the ICC prosecution just now? Mm-hmm. Well, let me tell you about that. So we were going to have this ICC prosecutor who's since been basically put to pasture. This ICC prosecutor was going to come to Israel in the beginning of the war. And he said, well, Israel has, it has a proper judicial system, and I don't see any real problem there. And he was about to come. And a day before he's about to come, he suddenly cancels the trip. And 2 days later, he issues this war crimes charge against me and the former defense minister. And we didn't understand, why did he do it? It took us months to discover that a few days before that, he was confronted by one of his staff members, a senior staff members, who brought the charges of rape and sexual misconduct that this prosecutor carried out against one of his staff members, a woman, a Malaysian woman, by the way, who was fiercely anti-Israel. But she had suffered this harassment and these rapes for over a year. Khan believed that this was his ruin. His brother, who's a British parliamentarian, was in jail for sexual misconduct too. So he said, that's it, that's the end of me. And then he figured out that there's one way to get out of this, and that is to deflect the entire conversation, to preempt it by blaming the Jews and blaming the prime minister of the Jewish state. And that's essentially what he did. Since then, you should know that there have been 4 or 5 other women who charged him with sexual misconduct. So what you have here is the ICC, which is a corrupt organization, totally politicized, unelected, that wants to, basically preempt the sovereignty of nations. And that's why the United States is not a member. They won't tell the United States that its soldiers are committing war crimes because some woke people in The Hague are telling you that. This ICC, this corrupt ICC prosecutor, thought that he would escape justice by basically by condemning us. And that's what he's done. And I think a lot of countries are waking up to that. It's sort of embarrassing when your chief prosecutor is doing such a corrupt and heinous thing. But that's the ICC. I mean, President Trump has put sanctions on him. He's put sanctions on the judges who did this. I think he's just facing it. That's what I like about him. He just cuts to the chase. This is a corrupt organization, a corrupt prosecutor, corrupt judges, and it reminds me of that movie. You remember Network? I think.
Yes.
We're not going to take it anymore. And it's not just Israel, because if they target Israel and they say to a democracy defending itself against these savages, you can't defend yourself, then no democracy is safe, and America isn't safe. So I think that's come out. There is extraordinary vilification, extraordinary lies leveled at Israel, and they're meant to prevent us from exercising our right, our legitimate right of self-defense. They won't succeed.
A lot of times the word genocide is thrown out there by people that don't necessarily understand what the definition of genocide is. They see that there's a war going on and there's a lot of people dying, and a lot of those people are civilians. And so they put it together that there's a large number civilians dying, and that must be a genocide. Well, first of all, genocide has its own specific classification as to what makes something a genocide. And the one thing that is important about the definition of genocide is intent. There has to be an intention to kill a specific group of people, to do away with a specific group of people. That in this context could be Arabs, could be Muslims, could be Palestinians. That is, however, that's not the case when it comes to what's going on in Israel. There are millions of Arabs and Muslims that live in Israel proper, that live in the jurisdiction where Israel has governing power in Israel. And they are, not only do they live free lives, but they live completely equal in every ability, in every capacity. The university professor, a Supreme Court justice, like that is something that is the reality on the ground. There's no apartheid, there's no segregation, there's certainly no genocide going to that particular group. The people that in the densely populated Gaza areas that are civilians, where Hamas purposely embeds themselves amongst them in order to get civilians to be killed, in order to garner world sympathy and world attention, that's the only war that they're able to win, is the PR war. This is not a genocide, because Israel has no intention of killing Palestinian civilians. It just doesn't. That's just not what's going on. There's an article back in June from historian Norman Goda, who says that what's happening in Israel is not a genocide. Why you can't call it a genocide, according to the 1948 Genocide Convention, as to what the definition of a genocide actually is. You may not. No one likes the fact that civilians are dying in war. However, unfortunately, that is an unfortunate part of war. That doesn't make it fun or good or thing that anybody should be celebrating or happy about. But we have to remember that the responsibility of that, who is responsible for every single death that happens in Gaza, is Hamas. Hamas could have ended the war right after October 7th, give back the hostages, surrender power, right? But Hamas instead has sworn that they're going to do more October 7th at the first opportunity that they get, and they are still holding hostages. Remember that. They are still holding hostages. They don't let the hostages go, and they don't surrender from power because they don't care about their own civilians. They want their civilians to die. This is how they garner world attention. This is how they win the PR war. And people who go along with that are actually helping Hamas in this, because that is what's prolonging the war. Every time Hamas comes to the table, or is willing to come to there, makes overtures that they're willing to come to the table, they get the agreement is like on the table, and then some moronic Western prime minister or whatnot will say that they support the idea of a Palestinian state, or major news outlets will talk about the whole genocide narrative, and they will feel empowered by it. They won't make a deal, they won't cut a deal, and they back out from the discussion table. Not that there was much of a discussion table to begin with. They are a terrorist organization, but Israel is using every means that they can possibly do in order to end this as quickly and seamlessly as possible. But leaving Hamas in power is not an option, because they're just going to do more October 7th and more October 7th, and that's just not something that Israel can tolerate. The idea of being critical and calling it a genocide, Israel's the only democracy in that whole region of the world. Calling that a genocide also undermines Israel's ability to defend itself, and really in that line of thinking, it makes that any Western country is unable to defend itself, because as soon as civilians start dying, if it's more than the number that a person imagines it should be, without knowing anything about urban warfare, without knowing anything about the dynamics of that particular war situation, as soon as people cry genocide, then you have to surrender, you have to stop, or there is a definition to this, and Israel is not meeting the definition. That is a very important point to remember when assessing everything going on over there. And if you like this content overall, hit that subscribe button over there in the corner. We'd love to stay in touch. Take care.